Hi everybody and welcome to Fieldsports Channel's podcast, episode number 6. Yes, we're back. I know we've been away a little bit, but trying to sort out scheduling and production schedules and time and when people are around was a little bit tricky, but I think I put my foot down enough now and tried to get these a little bit more frequent for you, if not once a week, as close to it as I possibly can. So in this episode, we are chatting to David Wright about episode 488 of Fieldsports Britain that went out last week, and we discuss a few things that happened whilst David was up in the Scottish Highlands talking to Niall Rowantree and to Dr. Cathy Main. We also have a bit of unseen interview with Dr. Cathy Main about the deer populations up in the Scottish Highlands and her thoughts on them, which is really, really cool. We also have another interview with Niall Rowantree that we did at the British Shooting Show back in February. And we're going to be back there again next year on a bigger, better and improved stand. Apparently, I've been told. I have no idea how we're going to improve it because it was so good this year. So just a big shout out to everybody that came along and said hi. Please, I do encourage it. Come along. It's always good to put a face to the names of certain people, and also just to meet some of you guys has been absolutely fantastic. But anyway, with that being said, let's get straight into it. Hi, David, and welcome.
Thank you.
Have you managed to close your shed door now?
It has gloves and it has a wooden play axe holding the whole thing together. So yeah, hopefully the door is not going to fly open, but we will see. The wind's starting to pick up.
Superb. This particular podcast, I would like to see if I can get this to be something a little bit more regular. Well, you kept calling it a post-match analysis of Fieldsports Britain. So that does kind of put us to a schedule of weekly if we're going to do these things, which is a bit dangerous to say. But we'll try our best to see how many of these we can do.
I know, you're very good. You're the one that pushes it. You're very good. You're very good. We need to be doing these because there's lots of stuff that we cover. So I totally agree. And if we can, especially if you've got something that's resonates with people, or we got a piece that resonates with people, then we can put that out and talk about. Because with a film, you do have stuff that ends up on the cutting room floor, and some of it is valuable. It's a real shame that some of it doesn't go out. So there is opportunity for extended interviews and things that we don't get a chance to wear, because it's not really a time constraint, because we can put as much as we want out, but it's just whether it fits with the film, whether that particular point is relevant to what we're trying to do. So there is surplus, and I think we need it'd be a shame not to use it, basically.
Absolutely. I think that's often the case when it comes to sort of making these types of things. You try and find your story arc about the thing you're trying to explain to people and the piece that you want to put out, but you gather so much material and you often get lots of people going, but what about this, but what about that? It's like, well, I did cover it, but it kind of would have taken us out of the story that I was trying to put together. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. So this will be a great way of letting those extra stories come together. I think that'd be quite good fun. So,
absolutely.
Speaking about those extra stories, talk me through what was in this week's show then.
So we had a piece which has been on the shelf. We don't have stuff that's on the shelf, but this has been on the shelf for 12 months, pretty much. I mean, give or take 4 weeks. And that's for a number of different reasons, really. Nothing like I say, oh, yes, we must keep that. It was just a case of that's the way it just ended up being. But we revisited one particular issue, which is the fish eagles, the reintroduction of fish eagles up in Ardnamurchan, but that has much wider reach for rewilding in general. You know, this is a test case really to look at rewilding, and people are trying to bring all sorts of things back into a world that's possibly moved on. But what was interesting about that particular subject is that this week that we heard about Natural England reintroducing fish eagles, white-tailed eagles, whatever you want to call them, into the Isle of Wight. So we're talking about 12 birds per year over the next 5 years. So that's a lot of talons going to be floating around the Isle of Wight. Now, I don't know why this sort of captures me, the story, and maybe it doesn't capture other people, but I've always had a thing about birds of prey. I think it's probably hanging around Lord Lupton a bit too much, to be honest. So, you know, they do fascinate me, and you know, and Roy has brought me closer to that. You know, certainly the bigger species like the goldies. So when you're dealing with something like the fish eagle, which is massive, and it seems to have pushed a lot of the golden eagles away from that particular part of Scotland as well. I think there's huge implications for farmers, and I think it'll be interesting to see how this develops, certainly on the Isle of Wight. Thankfully, Carlos, who does some freelance stuff for us, lives in the Isle of Wight, and I have asked him already to go and have a chat with some of the sheep farmers that may or may not have been spoken to about this particular issue, because, that's I think one of the biggest problems, as I understand it, was when they reintroduced fish eagles to Ardnamurchan. I think they tried. Now, I could be wrong here, but I'm understood. I believe that they used sheep carcasses in order to keep them in that area. So if you sort of introduce them to that type of feeding regime, then they may well just look for that particular meal ticket.
Yeah, you're just basically training them, right?
You're training them. But there's also the knock-on effect. I mean, this is not the eagle's fault.
No.
This is not the eagle's fault in the slightest. They are a hunter, and they want to, first of all, survive, and secondly, they need to breed. So they want to make sure that they are, they have the protein and the foodstuffs that they need. However, there is also talk about these animals are not doing particularly well on furry things, and they need the oils and they need all that nutrients from a fish that they don't get with a lamb. But they eat all sorts of different things, because they need it to survive. So I think it's a case of watch this space. I mean, they lost 300 lambs. They're saying they lost 300 lambs on the Ardnamurchan Peninsula last year. That's to the crofters. That is a lot. So even though we had an eagle story in news this week talking about the fact that we haven't seen physically a big fish eagle swooping out of the sky and plucking a lamb and taking it away, just like How to Train Your Dragon. But there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that it takes place. So that was one part, certainly, of the piece this week from Scotland that was interesting, including the angry man. And I wasn't joking when I wrote the script about when you Google inflatable angry man, which is what I did, because the frustration was that I filmed it, the angry man, from a distance, and my intention was the following day we were going to get some close-ups of the inflatable angry man, but Neil actually had a 24-hour bug and wiped him out, which is why he's not there with Kathy talking about the ecological side of stuff. So he was on his he was looking after himself in his bedroom and not feeling particularly well at all. So I was really looking for a still of where to get your inflatable orange angry man, but sadly there wasn't a picture for it. Maybe they're just not commercially available. So if you wanted one for your back garden or whatever, but that in itself, I think it's there's well-intentioned thinking, but it's just you've got a massive animal that really thinks it's king of the hill, and to see an orange inflatable thing just waving around, I just thought it was really very, very funny. So it's very difficult when there's obviously a lot of science behind it, but when you see it in the flesh or in the rubber or in the latex, it doesn't really deliver on the promise that this is going to terrify the living daylights out of any passing sea eagle. So yeah,
I think it's like anything. I mean, you put something out there like that, they probably are spooked by it for the first sort of few instances, but after a while they are going to get used to it. Surely, it's. I suppose you can keep moving it around into different spots so it pops up and sort of, but yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, it's like the same as having a flag or something. What does it actually do? I mean, there was a number of them around the peninsula. So if people haven't watched the film, there's it's probably a 6 foot tall inflatable, just like so you used to see them sort of on the outside
side of
car lots where they're
car lots, exactly.
Waving their arms.
It's like one of those. But it's got a siren. But the wind was blowing so strongly off that coast, and it does. I mean, putting one on a headland is not a good idea. They joke about people that come into that particular area and they decide, why has everyone built their houses down below when you want to take in the view? So put your house at the top of the hillside. It's like, well, okay, fine, but then you'll lose your roof. There's a reason why the houses are at the lower side of the on the coastal road as opposed to above it. So yeah. So there was that, and then there was obviously the steam engine. Now the steam engine was very interesting, and obviously very visual. It's great to have when you've got ideas, you've got stories like that, but you can actually illustrate it with something as dramatic and as beautiful as that steam engine. Again, it's very difficult because all this stuff, I'd love to go on that steam engine with my children. I'd love to. It's one of the most beautiful lines in the whole of the world. But it's just, again, some joined up thinking.
Just explain to the viewers that possibly haven't seen the program yet, that sort of what was the problem with the steam engine?
The steam engine is on the Western Line. It's the same line that Harry Potter goes to Hogwarts on, but the trouble is when it is under strain, when that steam engine is pushing hard, it throws out cinders, and those cinders are setting the landscape on fire. So you've got all this protected woodland and protected moorland that the deer managers are doing their utmost to try and work with government and trying to reduce the deer levels to reduce the impact on grazing. But that's all erased with one sort of flash fire that destroys the whole thing. So the deer managers are incredibly frustrated in that you've got this beautiful steam engine coming through. Now, this traditionally has not happened because a fire break has been maintained between track and environment. So this apparently, we are not from the age of the steam, are we, Mr. Jones? So, we don't know this, but, there used to be a fire break maintained between track and environment, fields, whatever it may be, over the world.
Fire break, what do you
mean?
So
they would clear areas so there wasn't a fuel load all along the side of a track because, the steam engines belch out stuff. And stuff that will catch fire. So anything that's sitting on, that flies out, sits on some tinder dry stuff. Obviously the wind will blow it so far. So you create that area of no fuel load either side of the tracks, and that then stops wildfires. But money's been lost, so they haven't been able to do that, and therefore wildfires have. I mean, Neil was saying that he's 15, 20 times it's gone up in the last 15, 20 years. So I don't know if it's every year, but. Wow. It's just a case of either just think about it, because the pressures on deer managers then to shoot more deer because of the impact it's having on the landscape. It's like, well, hold on a second. What about the big chuffing thing that's going past and destroying landscape? How does that work? How can you analyze and assess the impact of grazing when you've got something that's completely devastating an area? That's not the deer's fault. They're not breathing fire while they're chewing. They're just this sort of there is.
I mean, the difficult part is it's easy to get wrapped up in one particular area of research and viewing and things, and not consider those other parts. And it takes somebody like Neil to where he lives to be able to observe that for years and start seeing those patterns in it and bring those to light. And I think that's something that kind of seems to be missing as well. But he's so good, isn't he? He's so good at the way he talks. And I mean, we've often joked about he should be in politics, and I honestly feel like that's the way he's heading. He really should, because he just speaks sense,
Either that or the tower. He'd have been in the tower a long time ago. Don't go on, get rid of him. Get rid of him. But he's passionate about, and he knows his stuff. I mean, that's what's frightening about it. He knows his stuff, and it's he talks a good talk, but but it's coming from a really clued up man. So he's brilliant, and he's a great source of information. There's lots of stories ticking away in the background that we'll hopefully be able to talk about soon. But this is where we are. We're at a crossroads now where it isn't going to be the sexiest of films. It's not hunt. It's we are, and I think the industry has to evolve again. And we've spoken about this. We have to go down this route where we're looking at the wider scheme of things. And we have to embrace the other stories, which we've talked about, nutritious and delicious. This is the nutritious side of it. It is good for us to know about this. It is good for us to understand that we're trying our best. And maybe the raptor story is about fish eagles. It's not. The national raptor story is about rewilding and fish eagles, and it's not about hen harriers and grouse moors.
Talking about the nutritious and delicious, I know we've spoken about it before, but for the people that don't know, just explain to me what you think nutritious and delicious viewing is.
Well, this is the YouTube thing. This is a YouTube mantra in that you should, if you've got a story to tell, if you've got a message, if it's one about, for us, talking about us, if it's about conservation, if it's about welfare, if it's about management, that I believe is in pretty much every single one of our films. We have very strong backstories. Whenever we do a story, it has those elements. But the delicious bit is, it's not the consuming, but it's, the consuming of, maybe it is the kill shot. Maybe it is that sort of moment of, you're trying to get into that shot. It's that moment of where maybe it's more about your heart rate increases. The delicious bit is when your heart rate increases, where the other one is a bit more laid back and you're just hopefully learning something. So that's what we try and do. You try and mix that heart rate going up a bit with a bit more of a gentle type of programming. And I hope this is something that people will sort of stick with us through, because we have been, we have been controversial in the past. We've got a few people's backs up, which I think is good, and that's, YouTube is a place to do it. But we have to grow up, and we have to also maybe lead a bit with where this industry needs to go as far as its programming is concerned. I'm a conservation biologist. That's what I did. That's what I studied. So I came from this not as a hunter. I came from this as a biologist, which is why I enjoyed interviewing Kathy. Yeah, I could have been doing that job. Honestly, I could have been doing that job. Yeah. I did the Transex thing. I did that. That was part of my degree. I was looking at yeah, I shouldn't do that voice. Sorry, there's nothing nerdy about doing that. It's a perfectly reasonable job. Perfectly reasonable job. Well, but that's not the way I went. But research is not for me. But population dynamics and conservation biology and all that stuff, and hats off to her. She is not in a world where what she does is seen as good. So, but she, fair play to her, knew that she was telling landowners and deer managers that their grazing impact was too hard. Therefore, you need to shoot some deer. And for her to say, I can't ask people to do that unless I understand it, is top notch. It's not to say that she's out every day, but she certainly enjoys the independent stalking. She talked about that off camera. And, I think what we'll do is we'll throw a little clip in now of she talks about the population dynamics of people that run estates and whether they want lots of deer or whether they want lots of stags. But she talks about the balance and how there's a very definite way of controlling your deer that will mean that you get better animals or more of one than another. So if you're after venison, that's one thing. If you're after stags, that's another thing. So we'll throw to that clip maybe now.
The science tells us that in an unmanaged situation, if deer density is allowed to rise, it will reach a kind of critical mass above which the land is incapable of supporting it, and the deer will then die off naturally, quite possibly catastrophically after a winter like the one we've just had, because deer populations, when there are too many of them, they all starve a bit, unlike sort of predator populations whereby you have a core number that can be supported and the others die quite quickly. With deer, they all die a bit. They all starve a bit. And most populations, as the density changes, the factors that affect the gender ratio and lots of other aspects of their ecology changes. And in deer, we understand that as density rises, the proportion of the population that is female also rises. And that relates to the deer's capacity to carry a pregnancy, and the pregnancies that will be lost under stress will tend to be the bigger fetuses, which will be the stag fetuses. The calf mortality tends to be higher in stag calves than it is in hind calves. And we find that because the hinds occupy the better ground, the stags will be pushed away. And if that marginal ground is too poor, they either migrate away or they die. And that will tend to be at the end of the winter. That's when deer mortality is at its greatest. So as the density rises, the proportion of that population that is female increases. If you didn't have enough stags to shoot, you could easily be forgiven for thinking that having more hinds would be a good thing. But actually, the reverse is true. The other problem with rising density is that your fecundity, the capacity of your hinds to come into estrus and to carry a pregnancy decreases. And that really relates to the hind's inability each year to reach that critical weight, that critical body weight, and enough body fat to allow her body to go through the very energy intensive process of going into estrus and then carrying a pregnancy, which, as we all know, is a big drain on resources. So most places have hinds who only carry a calf every other year. And yelled hinds that have not got a calf at foot, will be fatter than hinds that have a calf at foot, just because of the energy requirements that are necessary in order to raise young. So as density comes down, we would expect to see a higher proportion of calves being born and surviving that are stags. And therefore the population gender ratio changing from a very hind rich population, which is what we've got at the moment, to something that more approximates 1-to-1. Now, if you're a sporting estate, you actually probably want more stags than hinds. But if you drop your hind numbers too low, then obviously its capacity to produce stags will decline just because there aren't enough hinds. But if you have a hind population that's too high, you will just not have enough stags, or in bad winters you'll lose a lot of them, or they'll push off somewhere else. So trying to get that gender ratio 1-to-1 should be a primary objective for deer management.
But as far as bringing that woodland back in again, that is what secures a lot of the health and the well-being of those deer. So you could probably carry more deer if you are looking after and managing your woodland.
You could,
properly.
yeah. So you could look at it in terms of quantity, or you could look at it in terms of quality. You can't have both. It's very difficult to have both. So the two things that I think are the limiting factors on deer numbers are the availability of food in the wintertime and the availability of shelter in the wintertime. That's the time that deer die. So having more woodland provides them with shelter. Having more woodland actually also provides them with food, as we've seen, because in the wintertime they will eat tree products, tree twigs, tree shoots, and they're reasonably nutritious for them. And there's a lot more biomass here than there is on the open hill. So woodland will tend to provide for both of those two limiting factors. If you want to have more deer, that may be possible, but you may still be chasing an impossible opportunity to bring that gender ratio back to the point where you're optimizing your stags. If all you want is lots of deer, then you only need one stag to however many hinds he can service. But if you want stags to shoot for sport, you need to look at a different model. And that probably means, for most places, a lower population than you currently have in order to get that gender ratio better towards more stags than they currently have.
So she was a fascinating lady, and she is very heavily involved with sort of environmental issues in Scotland. So but she's a good person to have, understanding and appreciating all elements of wildlife management. But she wasn't just talking about deer. There's a hell of a lot of sheep out there that are doing grazing damage. It's not just the deer, and that's the problem. They forget about the small number of deer compared to the huge number of sheep. But that's another
Bring
issue.
some more sea eagles. That's what we need.
Yeah, it'll all balance itself out. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Yeah. But then
Also in the program, it seems like a lot of people were quite taken by, even though you were saying it's delicious and nutritious, the nutritious stuff, you're always kind of quite wary about sort of putting something out that isn't all just predominantly hunting and going on a hunt. And I think you're kind of right, but I also feel like that stuff is hugely important to people that need to understand why they go out and hunt and the reasons why they have those opportunities. So I think that's really, really super important. And I find it absolutely fascinating. These problems sort of arising and being discussed and talked about, I think is just a part of the bigger picture that is super important.
I think the one thing that really resonated with me, and I hadn't really thought about it this way, so again, something Kathy said. Kathy was talking about populations, talking about predator populations, and when times are hard, the strongest will survive. They will the ones that will beat everybody off, and they will get to that carcass, or they'll be able to pull that animal down and take it, whatever it may be. But when you're dealing with a herd system, and she was talking about whatever they're consuming at the time is at a really low level. It could be overwintering, whatever. But she said the herd, they will all die a little. And now that really struck me. I thought, you're absolutely right, because, whether you're a massive stag, which will actually need far more calorific intake than a small little calf, but the calf hasn't got the cover, it's fat reserves maybe, but they will all die a little. So the fact that you get these absolutely huge catastrophic population drops is down to the fact that there's just, they've all suffered. So after a harsh winter, they've all died a bit. So they need to be able to find enough food. But if they're not kept to a certain level, then the whole herd will die a lot, not just a little bit. So yeah, that's what's great. Because yes, if I hark back to what I was doing in my 20s, it runs parallel, absolutely parallel with all that. What we do as yeah.
Way back in the 20s when you were 20.
Yes, I've never stood on a platform, Mr. Jones, with my notepad. I'll tell you that.
I don't believe it for a second. Well, that's fantastic. I think the episode itself, or that particular segment of the episode, was truly fascinating. It makes you see things in a different light, which is great. But also in the program, we went out and did some foxing as well, right?
Yeah, there's your delicious bit. There's your bit of delicious. Lupton being delicious. That was yeah. It's really weird. I mean, thermal's becoming a massive part of people's lives and how they're controlling foxes. And yeah, you sort of almost feel like Roy's sort of a heavy heart, really, because thermal is just giving him so much more advantage over the foxes. But I think that the shot of that particular piece was the fox just meandering through the field in thermal through the and there's lambs all around him. So that's I think proves a point. But yeah, he's I think it's good. It's almost like therapy for Roy, because he is so busy checking incubators, and he was after. So when I left him, so we finished close to midnight, but he knew he had to get up at 4 to impregnate one of his falcons. So, but it was about something about she had an inverted cloaca. I don't know. I sort of switch off, but he said, I've got to pop some semen in at 4, and I think he might have to pop some semen in at 6. But yeah, you just daren't look at his fridge at this time of year. You just don't know what you're gonna get.
Especially at 4 o'clock in the morning, you've got to be careful what you put in your coffee, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
So he's all over. He's looking better this year, and he's usually just covered in juices of all sorts. His jacket is he's just yeah. You would just walk straight past really quickly if you just saw it. It's sort of,
oh dear.
But no, so he's doing the foxing. I think is his little taste of sanity. But he loves it. He still loves it. I mean, God knows how many foxes I shot. But it's also interesting as well. I mean, again, something I learned in that he shoots a Baron vixen, and the idea that she is there helping within the den with any cubs, because she had fur missing from under her underbelly where the cubs have been trying to suckle from her, and those sort of things. I just people say, "Oh God, do another foxing," but there's always something. There's always something to learn. Even if it's because that was filmed at the weekend, so it literally is happening now, and that's what I've always tried to do to make things seasonal. So Roy's going out there; he's using that particular call on that particular night, and that hopefully is relevant to other people. So if people haven't tried that particular call on that Fox Pro, then maybe they'll give it a go. It's it's just a way of showing people what Roy. He's pretty good at what he does. What he's doing this time of year, it might be relevant, might not be relevant, but
it always amazes me that the guys that have hobbies enjoy those hobbies, but they have to take the technology, and people and industry around them always develop the technologies so far and so advanced, like the thermal and stuff like that. No one would have even thought about thermal 5-10 years ago at a most, really. I mean, apart from that, it was military stuff that was like high spec, really super expensive. It's so expensive now.
It is expensive now, but even Neil mentioned it as well, so in that piece. So thermal is part and parcel of people's lives.
Is it making the shooting of foxes and things like that too easy? Is it making the game of hunting we get to the point where we're like right at the pinnacle of all the technology and everything? It's literally a case of now you can see foxes glowing in the dark. It's whereas before those foxes would have got away, they would have been a bit more sporting because they wouldn't have been seen or spotted if they were cunning. Is it how far does it go before we've got drones that we send out, that just go and annihilate foxes?
I certainly think that thermal is having more of an impact on foxes. I was once told by Richard Folds, MBE, was one of the first ever foxing films I did, if not the first foxing film I did, and he said, if you shoot one fox, two come to its funeral, and that's something I've heard after that. It just doesn't seem to stop. I mean, there does seem to be, foxes seem to be a big issue. There's plentiful food around, and there's certainly a massive urban population as well. So, I think certainly the impact is there. I think maybe it's not a case of less foxes. I think it's maybe less times that Roy goes out. So instead of him being 3 nights out a week, he's out 1 night a week, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
So maybe it will balance itself out. Yeah, so he can spend more time inseminating.
What a lovely image. We'll have to get
apologize.
him on the podcast at some point and have a chat to him about it.
Oh my god.
So what are we looking at for potentially for next week? Do you know?
Yes. I'm going on holiday.
Yes, of course, you are going on holiday.
No, I filmed a young lady it's her first time behind a full bore rifle, and we took her through some training, or Paul did, and then she shot her first deer. So that was pretty cool, actually. This is a young lady who doesn't eat meat very regularly. She really is a pescatarian and has been vegetarian for a long time before that. So this was a journey. So that's interesting. And then we've hopefully got Andy was filmed just at the back end of the season doing a simulated game day. A serious amount of shells fired. So it's crow on the sim day is the plan.
Warming up the barrels.
You know that these things can change on a Monday and a Tuesday.
Absolutely.
And
Wednesday morning.
Yes. Yeah. It's like one of those. It is that swan with its feet. It's more like a pedalo than a swan.
With you and Charlie sat in it, going into the love tunnel. So we're
who's he?
So this weekend then, which is going to be current for anybody I don't know when this is actually going to be going out. I'm going to try and get this out as soon as I possibly can for people, but good luck this weekend, because you are running a couple of workshops as well.
Yeah. Well, you're there for moral support on the Friday, so
I am.
So no, I'm really. It's been really interesting, actually. Just thinking about what do I do? It's sort of you just do it. But I mean, okay, so yeah, I mean, maybe something to think about. When I was filming Paul and this young lady who you'll see next week, Imogen, we had to crawl. We had to crawl to get into position, and it's something that I've also done in Finland, where I exert a bit of body heat because I've exerted myself, and I get to bring up the eyepiece to my eye, and not only does that steam up, but my glasses steam up too. So I was shooting. Well, I was filming blind, and I filmed blind when Kai shot a moose last year, and back in last year. I had no idea whether it was in frame or not, or even was in focus. I had no idea because we'd got to that point and we'd been running, and so yes,
giving away the secrets.
So I'll be talking about how to avoid doing stupid things like that. So yes, those things do crop up, and it's when I've been out over the last couple of days and like filming Roy. Filming in the dark is really boring. I mean, that's the other thing with thermal. You just don't see anything. So unless you've got decent night vision on your camera, it ain't going to work. So that's become a pain in the backside because lamping was fine. But yes, we're going to be covering lots and lots of different stuff.
So if anybody out there doesn't know what the heck we're talking about, David's running a workshop, a 2-day workshop over Friday and Saturday of this week, and it's going to be about production. Is that right?
It's going to be about people who want to film their own stuff. So it's how to do a piece to camera, how to not just film something, produce something. Produce is different from going out and just throwing a camera around. So thinking about what you're going to do before you turn the camera on. When you do turn the camera on, make sure that you've got the right shots. So Mr. Jacoby's work will be assessed.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to that part.
There's going to be a big button.
It's not fair. He's not here to defend himself, which I'm sure he'd do a very poor job at.
I have proof. I have much proof. He's pretty much the only person I go, now see this? This is how not to position an interview. Now see this? Crow here is out of focus. Anyway.
It's all good. Well, good luck with that.
Hopefully
next time we get together and chat, we will have a chat about how that went and see who to keep an eye on. Who is the budding field sports sort of talent of the future, that's for sure.
Yeah. All
Excellent.
Right, thanks, Aaron. Go away.
Thanks a lot. See you later.
Bye.
Excellent stuff. Always a pleasure, Mr. Wright. Thank you very much. And now we head over to the British Shooting Show, where Charlie and David have a chat to Niall Rowantree.
Neil, can I just start by just paint us a picture of Ardnamurchan? What does it look like and what's it got?
Ardnamurchan, as you say, is the furthest westerly point in the UK mainland. It's a mixture of ancient oak forest, volcanic rock structures. You've got a lot of what they call designated habitats and sites. So it's particularly green, as you can see on the screen behind you. It's not like the eastern highlands, which are dominated by heather. And like all West Highland communities, it's a mosaic of hill farming, crofting, deer stalking, and a bit of coastal shellfish fishing. And that's how we all make our living.
It's warm, and you've got people there.
It's interesting. I mean, again, you've got a good bit on behind you. The population of the area at the time of the Jacobite risings was about 6,000 people. And today, the resident population in the winter is 180, and the summer population is around 5,000.
So you're almost back to pre-Jacobite levels just from tourism?
Just from tourism. I mean, it's a very maritime climate. When it is dry, it's beautiful, but like all of the West Highlands, it can rain a little. So we get about 2.5 metres of rain a year. And changes in climate have already started to show changes in species and success and survival. So it's an interesting part of the UK to visit, and it's got a lot of historic features. And fascinatingly, man has been there since the early Bronze Age.
Now, what I like about Year in the Life of Red Deer is you're not just a deer manager, you're a kind of a community manager, you have an entrepreneurial side to you. You look at red deer as a resource as well as a beautiful animal that walks around the place. This is not always a very popular view, though, is it?
I think it's interesting, and one of the things we're talking about is how sort of hunting continues into the future and public perception. The thing as a starting point to remember is that of all of the European countries, Britain probably has a higher percentage living in cities than anybody else. And that's unfortunately created a disconnect between urban lifestyles and rural lifestyles. And what is my home, where I work and make a living, is very often where people go to escape the stresses and strains of daily life. And these naturally, Charlie, as you know, lead to some conflict, because people like to arrest nature at the point that they first engage with it. And the idea of managing it, using it as a resource and generating an income from it can lead to conflict.
Just explain arrest nature at the point at which they first encounter it.
Well, if you look at what I'm walking over there behind you, that's a very classic montane habitat. So people that first came to Ardnamurchan and saw it as that green landscape, that's their vision of now. That's how it should be maintained, and that's how it should be going forward.
So are you saying that there's a sort of a Disney aspect to this, that they kind of see it as a picture and they don't want it spoiled?
Well, I think you make your living from media, so I'm going to be careful how I put this.
It's my fault then.
No, I think the media has a huge role in everybody's life now. I mean, I did it to myself for the last week. I had a look and saw how many hours a day I spend tinkering with my iPhone. And it shocked me that I spent over 2 hours in a day looking at what was on my phone. And I don't know about the rest of everybody here, but it's probably similar.
I think many of us look at our iPhones more than 2 hours a day. Luckily, my children mainly.
Yeah, so I think the big influence is what appears on that can craft people's thinking. I think David Attenborough was remarkable in what he did when he talked about plastics in the ocean. And it automatically garnered not only a national result, but an international result. And I think media has a huge role to play in giving people a vision of what their natural environment should look like.
So what's our problem on our side of the argument? Do we lack the vocabulary?
How brutal do we want to be about this? I think part of the problem is that within the shooting lobby, we feel very attacked. We're nervous as to what we talk about. I think we're all feeling now we have to be careful about what we share, we show. And then there's an anti-lobby that have become very, very gifted at using anything we do publish. And then I think the majority of the British public aren't anti-hunting. I don't think they know a great deal about it. There's maybe a challenge for us. And it's how we successfully do what we do without turning people that don't have an interest or an opinion into anti-hunters. That's our challenge.
Can we just return for a second to deer, which is your kind of cornerstone species on Ardnamurchan, isn't it? What is your vision for a kind of functioning Scottish hill deer herd?
Well, this is interesting. I mean, we're about to go in Scotland into our fifth review in 3 years. So at the moment, 60% of Scotland is under the microscope. Though when government publish things, they talk about national reviews. And there's a challenge about the number of deer and the impacts that they have on the environment and delivering this wonderful term, the public benefit.
They are wedded to the public benefit. This review, is this going to be what happens to Scotland's deer nationally? Is that the idea?
Well, the vision is that it is a national review, but what it's really going to be about in this early stage is the review of the deer management group process. And the reason I bring that in just now is that to make deer populations viable, that they are a positive income to a rural community, you need to have deer at a density of between 6 to 8 per square kilometre. For a lot of environmental objectives, people seek much lower densities than that. So my vision of a healthy deer population starts off with what they're standing on, the landscape that they live in, and how you manage them to maintain that.
Okay, so we're seeing a sort of a problem from the start, aren't we? We've got the central belt or the Antis or whatever, this urbanised majority who want to see deer pretty well wiped out as far as you're concerned, and then you've got your side who's saying no, we can still hold a sustainable number as long as there's this number.
And I would divide it into 3 categories. There's people that have had traditional land uses that they've managed for many, many years, who have demonstrated in the last 4 to 5 years an ability and a desire to work with wider society to manage deer and deliver public objectives. But making a point that there is a certain level they can reduce to when as a business they're no longer viable. Then there's an entrenched lobby who have a vision of Scotland that's somewhat different, you could say, to yours and mine. And then I think there's the public at large who are watching this. And I think the challenge, and why I've worked so much with you guys and enjoyed it, is the challenge is to get the message of what's really happening across to the voting public so they can make a decision as to how Britain should look in the future.
All right, we're back to politics again.
Sorry, I'll try and avoid that.
No, that's good.
Nicola's not here, is she?
Is there anybody here called Sturgeon? Sturgeon in the house? No, I am pleased. Good. All right, let's just go back to deer. So we're looking at the Niall vision of deer. If we were to go down to the Nicola vision of deer, would Arden and Merkin be able to survive?
Well, I think this is going to be interesting to watch, and in the coming year we'll start to talk about this. The problem we have is it's very difficult to look at deer, particularly in the open range, on their own. Because if you start looking at browsing and grazing impacts of one mammal, it's very difficult to do that if there are other mammals sharing the same landscape. So if we're talking about landscape change, we then have to start thinking about sheep and cattle, and what gives you the best return, secures the most employment, and underpins your community. And at the moment, economically, if we take the subsidy away, which we might have to with the whole Brexit debate, deer are a pretty clear winner.
In what way?
Because economically, properly managed, they'll break even, if not make a small margin. And when you manage landscapes, you've got to imagine that a lot of people look at big highland estates and wealthy landowners. These guys are net investors. The whole thing of good land management, no matter how skilled you are, it's about breaking even or making a small margin. And that depends on the year. So what we need is a partnership where we can keep that kind of money coming into the land. I think I said to you a couple of years ago, Highland Estates, when they came about, were the super yacht of their day. It was about demonstrating what you could afford to lose, not what you're trying to make.
So if you ban super yachts, you don't really harm the rich that you're aiming at, you just harm the boat builders.
Exactly. It's the people on the ground. I mean, sporting tax already has started to bite, and it will have an influence on the employment of people in rural places.
Let's just stop on sporting tax for a minute. Just explain what that is, because we don't have it in the rest of England and Wales. What is it?
Well, what's come about is that the Conservative government a number of years ago did away with sporting tax, and a lot of people thought the whole principle was that it was a get-out-of-jail-free card for their Tory mates. The real truth was it cost more to actually bring in than it was worth. So there was a government statement that they would reintroduce this. And when they brought it about, they then gave the district valuers the challenge of how do you actually put a value on it. And it would have been a difficult task for any of us. So what they looked at was arable ground, forestry and open moorland. And they arrived at a rate for forestry and arable ground of £4 a hectare. Now, the immediate negative impact was to a lot of farmers who actually shot deer on their farms because they were a problem, or had people come and shoot pigeons or shoot geese. These were actually protection services. So suddenly to give them £4 a hectare of a rates bill was a bit of a negative blow. As far as forestry goes, the problem is that government wants to see an expansion of forestry, but if you own a Highland deer forest and pay £2 a hectare, why would you want to double it to £4 a hectare by planting trees on it? So it's led to a debate where people are going, is this fair? Is it in the public interest? And are there more efficient ways of taxing rural areas? But this debate has to go on now because it's now legislation and the process is underway.
Well, it's a bit beyond a debate, isn't it? I mean, the first court cases are coming out now, and I know from North West Sutherland we're seeing 60% is being knocked off the first few years of the bill as long as they pay it, as long as they agree to pay it. And of course, having agreed to pay it, then they will, then it can go up and up.
Yep, I mean, I don't because we're actively involved in a number of them. I can't go into specific cases at the moment.
Okay, I heard 60%. He can't tell you what it is, but it's still the principle is established, and so now we're going to have to pay. Is there any more to it than this? Because it does seem to be entirely political. It's about bashing estate owners, isn't it?
Well, I think at the end of the day there was a perception that there were vast. I mean, a lot of people drive across a Scottish estate, see a big house. They see a well-turned-out keeper in a nice Land Rover and they think there's money being made here. I think that the most unusual thing about British sporting is that it's the most incredible go at environmental philanthropy. And I think, again, it's about connecting with the public and saying that there's no... I mean, Jason made a point talking about earlier.
This is Jason Doyle, Fieldsports Ireland.
I mean, basically, Jason said if a Ferrari only cost £10, people wouldn't really object to you driving it. And there is a bit of a background to that there's a perception that this is the prestige ownership of wealth, and society needs something back from that.
All right, you've got to a kind of gloomy kind of bottom of the well now. So let's just go one step further, and then we'll come back to Q&A. We'll talk about deer, and if you want to talk about politics, he's more than happy to. If Scotland is the basket case you describe, what's going to happen? Are people going to go to Ireland?
Well, no, I think that the great thing about human animals is that as things start to affect people, then they start to take more of an interest in it. I mean, we don't want to get into Brexit, we'll be here all day. But as the things start to influence people, then opinion starts to grow. And I think that what's coming across to us now is that a lot of rural communities have been quite open that they like deer stalking, they see it as bringing an income into their community, and they want more from it. And I think all of us can accept that people being more involved is a good thing. I think where the challenges lie ahead, and I'm going to open another one up for you here, is that at the moment, if we want to change the game in Scotland, I think the easy win is the fact that we've just had a government send out contracts to up to nearly £7 million to shoot deer.
So this is paying rent-a-kill to go and shoot your deer for you?
Well, we don't want to be too cruel to them. Some of the guys will be here today. I mean, the contractors have adapted to a market that's been made available to them. But my biggest concern is that the best income for a rural community? And do we really need to shoot our deer out of season and at night, when in this hall in front of us are an army of people who would quite happily go out and cull these deer under supervision? So, and it's interesting when you debate it, people come back and say, oh, well, the Forestry Commission do allow this. My flip side of that coin is, well, we actually own the Forestry Commission. The people in this hall do. So the people you elect should listen to you. And if you want greater access to hunt, then go to your politicians and demand it.
You seem to be relentlessly optimistic about this. I mean, you're giving us a lot of logic here that just it's unassailable. How can Nicola Sturgeon ignore this? You know, you're providing her with an answer to her deer problems, her land management problems, her anything outside Glasgow and Edinburgh problems, and she's still not listening.
Well, to paraphrase Sun Tzu in The Art of War, when you corner your enemy, give him an out. And I think the out there is getting the man on the street to do what he's more than competent to do. And that's what this building is about. People with top quality equipment, having got the best training they can, going and harvesting a natural resource to feed their family. What can be wrong with that? I'm fascinated looking at everybody here. What I'd love to know is your opinion is, would you like to hunt on public land? Do you think there should be a change there?
So how do we bring that about, Neil?
Well, I think the vehicle you're attending here is one of the ways to get it started. And I think the other way is as a hunting community, through the organisations you're members of, put pen to paper and demand it.
Say, dear Basque, dear Countryside Lands, dear whatever it is, I am a taxpayer, I own my Forestry Commission, I want you to lobby them to allow me to hunt on their land.
Absolutely. I mean, I think what people have done voluntarily to sign up to minimum standards of competence has demonstrated that they're ready and willing for this challenge. And I think government asked you to sign up to this level of competence. They've asked you to put healthy food into the food chain. So I think it's only fair to go back to them and ask for access to your land. It's interesting, I heard Andy on just before, and a lot of guys were here going, how do I get shooting permissions? Well, it strikes me that that's one of the most obvious starters. And I think importantly for any of the wildlife rangers that are here, and I spent 16 years of my career as a wildlife ranger, that it's unfortunate to see these guys' jobs being lost, when perhaps these guys could be anchors in the community that supervise hunting at a local level. And we're really talking about deer stalking primarily here, and actually create opportunity where they can supervise 10, 15, 20 guys to be out in a woodland culling.
Niall Rowantree is a world-class stalker, deer management, and now a political party. Can I say, if you have the opportunity to go to Ardnamurchan, please do. It's one of the most beautiful places. The money they put into into Mingery Castle up there, into the distillery. The distillery is good as well. I mean, they have turned it into a fabulous community and a wonderful place to stalk. And of course, if you haven't seen A Year in the Life of Red Deer, please look it up on Fieldsports Channel. Neil, thank you very much.
You're more welcome. Thanks.
Well, there you go. Thank you very much for listening to this podcast and for downloading it. If you'd like to know about any of the new podcasts that are going to be coming out much more frequently, as I said at the top of the show, or even listen to some of the older ones that we did earlier on in the year, then we can be found on Apple Music, SoundCloud, Spotify, Google Play Music, and on our website. And also, you could see us if you'd like to look at David's pretty face, then pop over to YouTube where you can actually watch the interviews as well. So thank you very much, and with that being said, I'll see you next time.